Hello, my name is Clayton Callahan. I am 33 years old. Today I stand here amidst a quiet cemetery in Nashville, Tennessee, where the chilly autumn winds wrap around my fingers as if trying to pull me to some faraway place. Beside me is Max, a 13-year-old boy with deep gray eyes that every time I look into them reveal a fragment of the past, of Tiffany, of Isla, of the days I once thought happiness was eternal. We stand before two graves, one large, one small. On the tombstones, their names are deeply etched. Tiffany Callahan, my wife. Isla Callahan, my daughter. Two lives that have left me, leaving behind voids that cannot be filled. I don't say much, neither does Max. The boy stands there clutching an old worn cloth doll, Isla's favorite toy. It's tattered, the doll's plastic eyes clouded by time, but Max holds it as if it's the only thing still connecting him to his sister. I place a bouquet of white daisies on Tiffany's grave. The delicate petals tremble lightly in the wind, as if trying to say something I cannot hear. Max bends down, placing the doll beside Isla's tombstone. His movements slow, almost reverent. I see his shoulders tremble slightly, but he doesn't cry. Max never cries in front of me. Perhaps he thinks he has to be strong the way I try to hide the pain in my heart. The cemetery today is unusually peaceful. Rows of maple trees glow with vibrant yellow, their leaves falling gently to the ground, forming a red-orange carpet beneath our feet. In the distance, the clear chirping of birds only deepens my sense of emptiness. I look at Max, the boy with tousled brown hair, his cheeks flushed from the cold wind. He is all I have left, and also a vivid reminder of the promise I once made to Tiffany. A promise I've tried my hardest to keep, though the cost has been greater than anything I could have ever imagined. I don't know where to begin this story. Perhaps from the early days when everything was as bright as summer sunlight, or from the moment it all came crashing down, when I realized life is never fair. But standing here before these two graves, I know that everything stems from Tiffany, the woman who changed me, who gave me the world and then took it all away, leaving behind just one final piece. More than 10 years ago, I met Tiffany on an October afternoon, when golden sunlight streamed through the vibrant red maple trees on the university campus. I, a final-year civil engineering student, stood awkwardly in a cheap suit at the corner of a room during a charity fundraiser for orphans. I was there because a friend had dragged me along, but I wasn't particularly interested. That is, until Tiffany took the stage. She wore a pale blue dress, her brown hair tied up high, her gray eyes sparkling like a lake under the sun. Her voice was clear, strong, yet full of emotion as she spoke about her childhood. A child raised in the foster care system, moving from home to home, never truly belonging to anyone. I was once a child no one kept, she said, and her sad smile pierced through my chest like a knife. I couldn't take my eyes off her. There was something about Tiffany that made me feel both heartbroken and in awe. A quiet resilience, as if she had learned to stand up after every fall without needing anyone to lift her. When the event ended, I mustered all my courage to strike up a conversation with her. I don't remember what foolish thing I said, only that she laughed, and that laugh made me forget the entire world around me. We started talking more often. Quick coffee breaks between classes, evening walks around the campus when the air was crisp and our breaths mingled under the dim glow of streetlights. Tiffany rarely spoke about her past, but when I asked, she'd smile and give brief answers. I lived with 7 different families before I turned 18, she said once, as we sat on a wooden bench by the lake. No one wanted to keep a kid like me for long. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough. She laughed, but I saw her eyes cloud over as if she were hiding an old wound. I wanted to tell her she was more lovable than anyone I'd ever met, that I wanted to be the one to keep her. But instead, I took her hand, squeezed it gently, and from that moment I knew I loved her deeply. Tiffany had a way of making me want to be the best version of myself, not because she demanded it, but because her sincerity made me believe life could be better than I'd ever imagined. After graduation, we moved to Nashville into a tiny apartment on the outskirts. It had one bedroom with a window overlooking a street lined with oak trees. The walls were peeling, the faucet leaked, but we didn't care. We had each other, and that was enough to make it a home. I worked for a small construction company, often coming home late with clothes covered in dust and the smell of wood. Tiffany taught kindergarten, bringing home stories about the kids she loved like her own. "Today little Joey drew me a picture," she'd say, her eyes lighting up. It was a house with a whole family standing in front. "I think he wants a real home." I'd hug her from behind, whispering, "You'd give those kids the world if you could." A year later, we got married. The ceremony took place outdoors under the canopy of a large oak tree in a small park. Tiffany wore a simple white dress, her hair loose and natural, and I'd never seen her more beautiful. We didn't have much money, no lavish party, just my parents, a few close friends, and a kind old priest. When she said, "I do," I felt my heart stop. In that moment, I thought this was the peak of happiness, that nothing could be better than this. Then Isla arrived, like a gift from the heavens. She was born on a spring morning when sunlight poured through the hospital window, illuminating the entire room. When the nurse placed Isla in Tiffany's arms, I saw her cry for the first time. "She has my eyes," Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at Isla with her soft wisps of hair and deep gray eyes, and I knew my life had changed forever. We named her Isla, meaning island, because she was our entire world, a safe haven amidst the waves of life. The years that followed were the most peaceful I'd ever known. Every morning I woke to Isla's laughter and the smell of coffee Tiffany brewed in the kitchen. Isla grew up fast like a gust of wind, bright, cheerful, and endlessly curious about the world. Tiffany was an incredible mother. She poured her heart into Isla, singing lullabies every night, telling her original fairy tales. "Once upon a time, there was a princess who lived in a magical forest," she'd begin, and Isla would nestle in her mother's arms, her eyes sparkling. I'd often stand in the doorway watching them, wondering what I'd done to deserve this happiness. But even in the sweetest moments, I noticed Tiffany sometimes grew quieter than usual. Some nights she'd sit by the window staring out, her eyes distant. I'd ask if she was okay, and she'd smile, saying she was thinking about the kids in her kindergarten class. I believed her, but deep down I felt a vague unease, as if there was something she hadn't shared. Then one day everything began to change. Tiffany grew more tired. She complained of headaches, and I started noticing small bruises on her arms, appearing more frequently. "I must have bumped into something in class," she'd say, but her voice wasn't convincing. I insisted she see a doctor, and the day we sat in the doctor's office, I felt the floor collapse beneath me. "Acute myeloid leukemia," the doctor said, his voice as flat as if he were reading a weather report. I couldn't breathe. Tiffany gripped my hand so tightly it hurt, but her eyes remained calm. "You have to be strong, Clayton," she said, her voice soft but firm. "For Isla." The months that followed were a nightmare. Tiffany fought the disease with all her strength, but each day I saw her weaken. She still tried to smile, still told stories to Isla, but the light in her eyes faded. I did everything I could, working extra hours to cover medical bills, praying every night, though I'd never been religious. But fate doesn't heed human pleas. Tiffany passed away on a winter morning when snow blanketed Nashville. I sat by her bedside, holding her hand until the last warmth left her body. Isla, only 2 years old, didn't understand what was happening. And I, with my heart shattered, didn't know how to comfort my daughter. I stood silently in our empty apartment, once filled with laughter. Everything was still there. Tiffany's coffee mug on the table, the fairy tale book she'd left half-read for Isla. But she was gone. I thought that was the greatest pain I'd ever endure. But I was wrong. Life had crueler ways to test me. The days after Tiffany's passing were like living as a hollow shell. I moved through each day mechanically, changing Isla's diapers, making her porridge, dropping her off at daycare, going to work. But it was all autopilot, as if I were trying to prove to myself that I was still alive. Isla, only 2 years old, was too young to understand where her mother had gone. She'd cling to my hand, her big gray eyes looking up at me with confusion, and ask, "Where's Mommy, Daddy?" Each time I heard that question, it felt like my heart was being torn apart. I'd hold her close, whispering gentle lies. "Mommy's in heaven, sweetheart. She's watching over us." But I didn't believe those words myself. Tiffany wasn't anywhere. She had left me, leaving a void I didn't know how to fill. Tiffany's funeral took place on a cold, drizzly day. Nashville seemed to be weeping with me. I stood under a black umbrella, holding Isla in my arms, watching Tiffany's coffin being lowered into the ground. I wanted to scream, to demand why life was so cruel, but I stayed silent. Isla nestled into my chest, her tiny arms wrapped tightly around my neck, as if she could sense the pain I couldn't voice. That night, after Isla had fallen asleep in her small room, I sat on the sofa, staring at Tiffany's belongings I hadn't dared to touch. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her favorite shoes still sat by the door. I didn't want to pack them away, didn't want to erase any trace of her. But I knew I had to do something, or I'd be trapped in this grief forever. I started with the old wooden box Tiffany kept on her dresser. Inside were small trinkets, a cheap bracelet, a few photos of us together, and a small brown leather notebook. I thought it was just a diary, but when I opened it, I found a sealed envelope with Tiffany's shaky handwriting. "To Clayton." My heart pounded. I don't know why, but I felt a vague dread. I held the envelope, my fingers trembling as I tore open the edge. Inside were 2 thin sheets of paper filled with her handwritten words. The ink was smudged in places, as if Tiffany had been crying as she wrote. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, and began to read. "Dear Clayton," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stay with you and Isla. I tried, you know I did, but I guess I wasn't strong enough to beat this disease. You always said I was resilient, but this time I lost." I had to stop, taking a deep breath. Tiffany's voice echoed in my mind, gentle but laced with pain. I wiped my eyes, forcing myself to focus on the next lines. "There's something I never told you, Clayton. A secret I kept because I was afraid you'd look at me differently if you knew. Before I met you, I loved someone else. He was the first person who made me believe I could be loved, that I wasn't just an abandoned child. But he wasn't like you. When I got pregnant, he left, leaving me with a child I didn't know what to do with. I was only 20, not yet graduated, with no money, no family. I gave birth to the baby, a boy, but I didn't have the courage to keep him. I left him at an orphanage. I abandoned my son Clayton the same way my mother abandoned me." I stopped breathing. The letter slipped to the floor, but I didn't dare pick it up. A son? Tiffany had a child I never knew about? It felt like the world was tilting beneath me. I wanted to scream, to ask her why, but she wasn't here to answer. I picked up the letter, forcing myself to keep reading, though each word felt like a knife. "I know you'll be shocked, maybe angry, but please don't hate me. I've lived with that pain every day, and I've tried to make up for it by loving you and Isla with all my heart. But now, knowing I don't have much time left, I have one request. If you can, please find him. His name is Max. I left him at Holy Cross Orphanage. Find him, Clayton, and if you can, love him the way you love Isla. I know it's selfish, but I don't want my son to grow up without knowing what love is the way I did." The letter ended with a short line. "I love you, forever." I sat there on the cold floor, the letter trembling in my hands. I didn't know what I felt, anger, pain, or just an endless emptiness. Tiffany had a son named Max, a piece of her I never knew existed. I wanted to blame her, to ask why she hadn't told me sooner, but then I remembered her distant gaze on those nights by the window. Maybe that's when she was thinking of him, of the heartbreaking choice she'd made. The days that followed, I was like a ghost. I took care of Isla, but my mind was consumed by Tiffany's letter. Find Max? How could I find a child abandoned years ago? But every time I looked into Isla's gray eyes, I saw Tiffany, and her plea echoed in my head. I couldn't ignore it, not because I wanted to, but because I knew Tiffany would never forgive herself if I didn't try. I started searching. I went to Holy Cross Orphanage carrying the letter and an old photo of Tiffany. The woman at the front desk, Martha, looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "I remember Tiffany," she said, her voice low. "She came here with a newborn boy crying so much when she left him." She checked the records and my heart stopped when she confirmed. Tiffany had left a boy named Max in 2014. But then she shook her head. He was placed with a foster family 3 years ago, then he ran away. We don't know where he is now. It felt like a punch to the chest. Max had run away, a child only 6 or 7 out there somewhere, alone with no family, no one to care for him. I left the orphanage with a scrap of paper listing sparse details. Max's birth date, the name of his last foster family, and an old photo of a thin boy with gray eyes just like Tiffany's. I posted ads, contacted charities, but it was all in vain. Max had vanished into thin air. I returned to Isla, trying to focus on her. She was my only light, but every time I looked at her, I saw Tiffany, and the unfulfilled promise weighed on my shoulders. I didn't know if I could find Max, but I knew I had to try. For Tiffany, for myself. But life, as I've said, has a cruel way of testing us. I didn't know that losing Tiffany was only the beginning. A greater tragedy was waiting, and its name was Isla. 3 years had passed since Tiffany's death. 3 years in which Isla and I tried to rebuild a life, even if it was just fragments of our old happiness. We left Nashville and moved to Bozeman, Montana, where I hoped the fresh air and majestic mountains would soothe my broken heart. I found a stable job, and Isla, now 5 years old, became the center of my world. She grew up quickly with curly brown hair and deep gray eyes just like her mother's. Every time Isla smiled, I saw Tiffany in her, and it was both a comfort and a source of pain. Life in Bozeman passed peacefully, at least to outsiders. I took Isla to kindergarten every morning, listening to her chatter about her friends and the drawings she made. In the evenings, we'd curl up on the sofa under the warm glow of a lamp, reading together. Isla loved adventure stories about brave princesses who ventured through deep forests to find treasure. "I want to be like a princess, Daddy," she'd say, her eyes sparkling. "I'll find treasure and bring it back for you." I'd smile, ruffle her hair, but inside I only prayed that my one true treasure, Isla, would always be safe. I hadn't given up on finding Max, the son Tiffany left behind. I kept his old photo in my wallet, occasionally contacting charities, but there were no new leads. Every time I looked at the photo, I saw Tiffany's gray eyes, and I told myself I couldn't give up. But life with Isla was so consuming that sometimes Tiffany's promise slipped into a quiet corner of my mind, a place I didn't dare touch. Then one day, everything fell apart. It was a summer afternoon when I went to pick Isla up from the kindergarten playground. She was running around with her friends, laughing, her green dress fluttering in the breeze. I stood by the fence watching her with a tired smile. Work had been grueling that day, but seeing Isla made me feel I could endure anything. Then suddenly Isla stopped mid-stride. I saw her stumble, clutching her chest before collapsing onto the grass. The children's laughter stopped, and a teacher screamed. I vaulted over the fence, my heart pounding like it would explode. "Isla!" I knelt beside her, cradling her head. Her face was pale, her lips slightly blue, but she managed to open her eyes. "Daddy, I'm tired," she whispered weakly. I scooped her up and ran to the car, ignoring the panicked looks around me. Only one thought consumed me. No, not Isla. It can't be. At the hospital, time seemed to stand still. I sat outside the emergency room, hands clenched, praying to anyone who might listen. Doctors and nurses moved in and out, their faces grave, and each time the ER door opened, I held my breath. Finally, a doctor, introducing himself as Dr. Harris, called me into a small room. He held a stack of test results, his voice low but clear. "Mr. Callahan, we've run tests. Isla has acute myeloid leukemia." It felt like the floor vanished beneath me. Leukemia, the disease that took Tiffany from me. It couldn't be. Not Isla. I shook my head as if denial could change reality. You're wrong, I said, my voice hoarse. Isla's only 5. She's healthy. She was running around this morning. But Dr. Harris just looked at me, his eyes full of regret. I'm so sorry, Mr. Callahan. It's a rare form in children, but not unheard of. We'll do everything we can. I nearly collapsed right there. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I just sat down, holding my head, trying to stop the tears. Isla, my little girl. She didn't deserve this. I remembered Tiffany's final days, how she'd held my hand, forcing a smile even as her body faded. How could I let Isla go through the same? Dr. Harris kept talking, his voice echoing as if from a distance. Isla needs a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible. It's her best chance. We'll test you to see if you're an HLA match. If not, we'll search the bone marrow registry or look for a compatible donor. I nodded, but inside I knew the odds weren't good. I remembered the doctors saying that finding a matching donor was a race against time, and with Tiffany, we'd lost that race. I couldn't let that happen to Isla. I signed the consent for testing immediately, and while waiting for results, I sat by Isla's bedside, holding her hand. My tiny girl lay in the hospital bed, IV lines in her fragile arm. She opened her eyes, giving me a weak smile. Daddy, do I have to stay here long? She asked. I kissed her forehead, forcing my voice to stay steady. Just a little while, sweetheart. Daddy will take you home soon. But I knew I was lying. The test results came the next day, and they hit like a punch to the chest. I wasn't an HLA match for Isla. Dr. Harris explained it wasn't surprising. Parents aren't always matches, but I felt like I'd failed her. I was her father, yet I couldn't save her. I enrolled Isla in the National Bone Marrow Donor Registry, hoping to find anyone who could give her a chance. But the doctor warned me the process could take months, even years, and Isla didn't have that kind of time. The days that followed were an endless nightmare. Isla started chemotherapy, and each time I saw her hair fall out, saw her weaken, it felt like a part of me was dying too. She still tried to smile, still told me about the princesses in her imagination. But I saw her eyes dim, just like Tiffany's had. I stayed at the hospital every night, sleeping on the hard chair by her bed, praying for a miracle. But each day the doctors brought worse news. No compatible donors in the registry. No matches on the waiting list. Isla's time was running out. I was on the verge of breaking completely. Some nights I sat in the hospital parking lot, pounding the steering wheel, crying like a child. I was angry, at life, at God, at myself. Why Isla? Why was fate so cruel? I thought of Tiffany's letter, her plea about Max. I'd failed her, and now I was failing Isla. I pulled Max's photo from my wallet, staring at his gray eyes. Tiffany, I whispered as if she could hear, you were wrong to trust me. I can't save anyone. But then one night, as I sat by Isla's bedside, a nurse from the ER rushed in, her voice urgent. Mr. Callahan, you need to come with me. There's a boy who was just brought in, no family, but I think you need to see him. He has eyes just like your daughter's. After hearing the nurse's words, my heart raced for reasons I couldn't explain. I kissed Isla's forehead, whispering that I'd be right back, and followed the nurse to the ER, unaware that my life was about to change forever. The ER was a chaotic scene, beeping alarms, nurses calling to each other, and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Nurse Ellen, who accompanied me, quickly led me to where the boy was. As we walked, she said, a truck driver found him by the roadside, nearly exhausted. No identification, no family, but... She paused, looking at me as if weighing her words. He has eyes so much like Isla's. I can't explain it, but I feel like there's a connection to your daughter. My blood rushed to my head as if the world suddenly narrowed. Eyes like Isla's? I didn't dare think further, but my feet followed Ellen down the hallway to a small room at the end of the ER. Inside, on a bed with white sheets, was a thin boy about 9 years old. He lay there, eyes closed, skin pale, brown hair matted with sweat. An IV line was attached to his arm and the heart monitor beeped steadily. I froze at the door, unable to move. His gray eyes made my heart skip a beat. They were identical to Tiffany's. Identical to Isla's. "This is the boy," Ellen said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We're trying to contact Child Protective Services, but he hasn't said much. We only know his name is Max." Max? The name rang in my head like a bell. I stumbled back, leaning against the wall for balance. It couldn't be. Not Max. The boy Tiffany left behind, the one I'd searched for without a trace. But as I looked closer, I saw the shape of his face. The slightly pointed chin, the thin lips, exactly like Tiffany's when I met her in college. I pulled the photo from my wallet, comparing them. My hands trembled. This was Max. I was certain. I turned to Ellen, my voice breaking. "I need a DNA test right now." She nodded, asking no questions, as if sensing something monumental was unfolding. While waiting, I sat by Max's bedside, watching him. He was so thin I could see his cheekbones protruding under his skin. His clothes were tattered, covered in dirt, as if he'd been wandering for months. I wondered how he'd survived, alone out there, with no one to protect him. "Tiffany," I thought, "do you see this? I found him." But why now, when Isla was fighting for her life a few floors away? The test results came the next morning. I sat in Dr. Harris's office, gripping the edge of the table. He slid a paper toward me, his voice serious. "The boy, Max, is Tiffany Callahan's son and Isla's brother. The DNA confirms their relation." I nodded, unsurprised, but still felt like a wave had crashed into my chest. Max was Tiffany's son. The boy I'd been searching for was here, in this hospital, but under circumstances I'd never wished for. I returned to Max's room. His gray eyes met mine, full of wariness, like a small animal cornered. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I sat down beside his bed, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Clayton. I knew your mother." Max frowned, saying nothing, but his eyes stayed fixed on me. I wanted to tell him everything, about Tiffany, about Isla, about the letter, but I knew it wasn't the time. This boy had been through too much, and I didn't want to scare him. In the days that followed, I split my time between Isla's and Max's rooms. Isla was still weak, but she tried to smile whenever she saw me. "Daddy, I dreamed about Mommy today," she said once, her voice faint. She said I have to be strong. I held her, tears falling silently. Max, on the other hand, was quiet. He recovered quickly with medical care, but kept his distance, answering my questions briefly. I didn't blame him. A runaway child like him had likely learned the world wasn't kind. Then one morning, Dr. Harris called me into his office. He looked at me with a mix of hope and caution. "Clayton, we tested Max's HLA for a potential bone marrow transplant for Isla. The results? They're remarkable. He's a perfect match." I sat there, stunned, unable to believe my ears. A perfect match? For half-siblings, it was almost a miracle. Hope flared in me, but so did fear. Would Max agree? And could Isla survive the transplant? I went back to Max's room, my heart heavy. He was sitting on the bed, staring out the window. "Max," I began, my voice trembling. "You have a sister. Her name is Isla. She's very sick, and you could save her." Max looked at me, his eyes full of doubt. I told him about Isla, about Tiffany, about the disease stealing his sister's life. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, his voice cold, "Why should I help? I don't know you or her." But I saw his eyes waver, as if a part of him was struggling. I left the room, giving him time to think. In my heart, I prayed he'd understand, not just for Isla, but for himself. Tiffany wanted him to be loved, to be part of a family. In my heart, I prayed he'd understand, not just for Isla, but for himself. Tiffany wanted him to be loved, to be part of a family. The days that followed were a test of patience. Max kept his distance, but I didn't give up. Each day I visited his room, bringing a cup of hot cocoa or an adventure book I thought he might like. I told him about Tiffany, How she sang lullabies, how she loved children, how she always carried a handkerchief in her pocket. Max listened, but said nothing. Once I caught him sneaking a glance at Tiffany's photo on the table, and his eyes softened, if only for a moment. I also brought Max to see Isla. The first time he stood at the door refusing to enter. Isla lay in bed, frail but still smiling when she saw me. "Daddy, who's that?" she asked, looking at Max. I introduced him as a special friend, not wanting to pressure him. Max stayed silent, watching Isla from a distance before turning away. But I saw him pause in the hallway, his shoulders trembling slightly. I wasn't sure what he was thinking, but I hoped some part of him felt a connection to his sister. Finally, one afternoon, Max called me back as I was about to leave his room. "Mr. Clayton," he said, his voice hesitant, "if I do that test, if I help her, you won't leave me, right?" I looked at him, my heart tightening. This boy, no matter how tough he seemed, was still just a child yearning for love. I knelt down, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Max, I promise. No matter what happens, I won't leave you." He nodded, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of trust in his eyes. Max agreed to the official HLA test, and the results were still miraculous. He was a perfect bone marrow donor for Isla. I hugged him, unable to say anything but thank you. Max just shrugged, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward in a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. The transplant was scheduled for the following week. I sat outside the operating room, hands clenched, praying with everything I had. Both Max and Isla were under special care, and I felt like I was standing on the edge between hope and despair. When Dr. Harris emerged, he was smiling. The transplant was a success. Now we just need to see how Isla responds. The days that followed were a series of miraculous moments I hadn't dared to dream of. Isla, my little girl, began to recover. Her fine hair had nearly all fallen out due to chemotherapy, but her gray eyes sparkled again, like the summer sunlight I'd seen in our early days in Nashville. The doctors said Isla's body was accepting Max's marrow, and her blood counts were improving daily. I sat by her bedside, holding her hand, feeling the warmth of her tiny fingers. And for the first time in months, my heart felt lighter. One morning, as sunlight slipped through the hospital window's curtains, Isla sat up in bed, beaming with a radiant smile. "Daddy, I want to go outside," she said, her voice clear but still frail. I looked at Dr. Harris, who was checking her chart. He nodded, smiling. "She can move around gently, but we'll use a wheelchair for safety." I felt like crying, but instead I hugged Isla, kissing her forehead. "All right, sweetheart. Daddy will take you for a walk." I wheeled Isla out to the hospital's small garden, where beds of golden daisies glowed under the sunlight. Max walked beside us, quiet but never taking his eyes off his sister. Isla reached out, touching a flower, giggling. "Daddy, these are like the flowers Mommy loved," she said, and I saw Max smile, a small but genuine smile. I looked at the two children, Isla with her glowing face, Max with his gray eyes full of emotion. And for just that moment, I thought life had been kind to me. The days that followed were rare moments of happiness I'll cherish forever. Isla grew strong enough to walk a few steps in her room or the hallway. She loved sitting on the garden bench, listening to me tell stories of brave princesses, just as Tiffany used to. Max joined us, though he was shy at first. "I don't know how to tell stories," he said, but Isla tugged at his hand, pleading. "Tell one, Max. I want to hear." Max blushed when she called him brother, but I saw him soften. He started telling a clumsy tale about a young knight searching for treasure, and Isla laughed, clapping with delight. "You're better than Daddy," she teased, and I pretended to be offended, making both kids burst into laughter. Max and Isla grew closer. Some afternoons I found them sitting together on her hospital bed, Isla teaching Max how to draw a princess while Max patiently held a pencil, though he insisted he couldn't draw anything. Once Isla drew a picture, a family of 4, me, Max, Isla, and a woman with long brown hair. "This is Mommy," Isla said, pointing to the figure. Max stared at the drawing for a long moment, then nodded. "Mommy's beautiful," he said, his voice soft but full of feeling. I turned away, wiping my eyes quickly, not wanting the kids to see me falter. I started bringing Isla's favorite foods to the hospital. Chocolate chip cookies like the ones Tiffany used to make. Vanilla ice cream from the shop near our old Nashville home. Max, though he didn't say it, loved them too, and I watched him devour the treats as if it was the first time he'd eaten something that wasn't scavenged from a dumpster. Once when I brought in a tray of cookies, Isla split them with Max, saying, "You have to eat a lot to be strong like me." Max laughed, a real laugh, and I felt like Tiffany was somewhere watching us with her gentle smile. These moments didn't last forever, but they were more precious than anything I'd ever had. One evening, I wheeled Isla out to the garden to watch the sunset. Max came along carrying an adventure book he'd borrowed from the hospital library. Isla lay on the bench, her head resting on my shoulder while Max sat beside us reading aloud about a magical island. "Like my name," Isla exclaimed, and Max paused, looking at his sister with a tenderness I hadn't seen in him before. "Yeah," he said, "this island is special just like you." Isla smiled, grabbing Max's hand, and my heart melted. In that moment, I wasn't a father fighting fear, but just a man living in happiness, however fleeting. Max changed during those days too. The boy who'd once been so guarded, who believed the world had no place for him, began to open up. One night, as Isla slept soundly in her hospital bed, Max pulled me into the hallway. "Clayton," he said, his voice hesitant, "I'm glad I helped Isla. I think Mom would be happy too." I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your mom is proud of you, Max. And so am I." He looked at me, his gray eyes shining, and for the first time he hugged me. An awkward but sincere embrace. I hugged him back, feeling the quiet strength of the boy who'd once wandered the streets alone. I started dreaming of a future, fragile as those dreams were. I imagined taking Isla and Max back to Bozeman, days spent walking at the foot of the mountains, evenings reading by the fireplace. I pictured Isla growing up healthy with Max by her side, the siblings sharing the stories Tiffany left behind. I knew these dreams might not come true, but in those days I allowed myself to hope. Yet deep down, I felt a lingering unease. The doctors monitored Isla closely, and though they said she was progressing well, I caught fleeting looks of concern in their eyes. One day, Dr. Harris called me into his office, his voice cautious. "Isla is responding well," he said, "but we need to closely monitor for graft versus host disease. It's the biggest risk post-transplant." I nodded, but my heart grew heavy. I didn't want to think about it, didn't want to believe this happiness could slip away. I tried to savor every moment with Isla and Max. One afternoon, I threw a small party in Isla's room. Just cookies, ice cream, and a tiny speaker playing Tiffany's favorite song. Isla clapped, laughing loudly, while Max, though shy, sang along. "Daddy, Max sings terribly," Isla teased, and Max pretended to be mad, chasing her around the room, making all three of us laugh until tears streamed down our faces. In that moment, I felt like my family was whole, if only for a fleeting second. But happiness, as I'd learned from Tiffany, is always fragile. The bone marrow transplant had initially brought hope. But then, like a storm breaking over a calm sky, complications arose. One morning, as I was making coffee in the hospital waiting room, Nurse Ellen rushed in, her face pale. "Mr. Callahan, you need to come now. Isla, she's not doing well." I dropped the paper cup, letting it shatter on the floor, and ran after her. In the room, Isla lay gasping for breath, the heart monitor beeping erratically. Doctors surrounded her, their voices urgent, filled with medical jargon I couldn't comprehend. I stood in the corner, helpless, watching my little girl fight. Max was there too, standing silently by the door, his gray eyes wide with fear. Dr. Harris later explained that Isla was experiencing graft versus host disease, a rare but dangerous complication where her body rejected Max's marrow. "We're doing everything we can," he said. But his eyes couldn't hide his worry. "She's very weak, Clayton. You need to prepare yourself." Prepare myself? How could I prepare to lose her when my entire world had already crumbled once with Tiffany? I held Isla's hand, whispering words of encouragement, but inside I felt like I was begging for a miracle that would never come. The days that followed were a series of nightmares. Isla grew weaker, running high fevers, and the doctors tried everything: immunosuppressants, blood transfusions, anything to keep her with me. I didn't leave the hospital, dozing off in the chair by her bed, waking only when a nurse shook me or the monitor's alarm blared. Max was there too, though he spoke little. He sat in the corner, sometimes holding Isla's hand, sometimes just watching her from afar. I could see he was trying to be strong, but his eyes were filled with pain, as if he felt responsible. One night, as Isla slept under sedation, Max pulled me into the hallway. "Clayton," he said, his voice trembling. "Why is it like this?" I gave her my marrow. I tried. He trailed off, head bowed, his shoulders shaking. I knelt down, pulling him into my arms, feeling him let himself be vulnerable for the first time. "It's not your fault, Max," I said, my voice hoarse. "You did everything you could. You gave Isla a chance." But deep down, I knew that chance was slipping away. I started praying, though I'd never been religious. I prayed to God, to Tiffany, to anyone who might listen, to let Isla stay. But each day her condition worsened. She smiled less, spoke less, and her gray eyes, once bright as summer sunlight, now dulled like the sky before a storm. I told her stories about her mother, about how much Tiffany loved her. Isla listened, sometimes smiling, but I knew she was tired. Max changed too. He started talking more, not just to Isla, but to me. Once he told me about his days on the streets, surviving on scraps from dumpsters or sleeping in abandoned buildings. "I always thought my mom didn't want me," he said, his voice soft but full of pain. "But now, I know she loved me in her own way." I hugged him, telling him Tiffany regretted leaving him her whole life and that she wanted me to find him, to love him like my own. Max didn't cry, but he nodded, and I saw a part of the wall around his heart crumble. Then came that fateful night. I was sitting by Isla's bed, holding her hand, when Dr. Harris walked in. He said nothing, only shook his head, and I knew. My heart felt like it stopped. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. I held Isla, feeling her faint breath against my shoulder. "I love you," I said, tears falling uncontrollably. "You're my everything." Isla opened her eyes, giving a weak smile. "I love you too, Daddy," she whispered, then closed her eyes. The heart monitor let out a long, unbroken beep. I don't remember if I screamed or stayed silent. I only remember Max rushing into the room, his eyes wild with panic. He froze, staring at Isla, then broke down sobbing. "She tried so hard," he said, his voice shattering. I pulled him into my arms, holding both children tightly. One who had left me and one who was here, hurting as much as I was. We sat there in the cold room, crying for Isla, for Tiffany, for everything we'd lost. The days that followed passed like a hazy dream. I decided to bring Isla back to Nashville, where Tiffany rested, so she could lie beside her mother under the oak trees in the small cemetery where we'd said goodbye to Tiffany. I wanted Isla to be close to her mom, as she always spoke of her in her dreams. The funeral was quiet. Max stood beside me, holding my hand, saying nothing. I saw him place a drawing, a princess standing in a field of flowers, on Isla's coffin. "Goodbye, little sister," he whispered, and I knew he had loved her, even if only for a short time. The pain of losing Isla was like a wound that would never heal, but Max became my reason to keep going. The boy with Tiffany's gray eyes was her final piece. I knew I couldn't leave him alone, not just because of my promise to Tiffany, but because I had begun to love him as I loved Isla. Together we faced the pain step by step, and I knew this journey, though agonizing, wasn't over. After Isla's funeral in Nashville, where I laid her to rest beside her mother, Max and I returned to Bozeman, where the majestic mountains stood silently like steadfast companions. Our small house felt emptier than ever. The sofa where Isla used to curl up to hear my stories now bore a thin layer of dust. Her scribbled drawings still clung to the fridge, each line a stab of pain. Max felt the emptiness too. He often sat by the window, staring out at the leaf-strewn road, his gray eyes clouded as if searching for something he couldn't name. The first months after losing Isla were a blur. I woke each day trying to keep busy with work and caring for Max, but the pain followed like a shadow. Some nights I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining Isla's laughter echoing from the next room. Max had his quiet moments too, sitting alone in a corner clutching Isla's old cloth doll. "She loved this," he said once, his voice soft but certain, as if trying to hold on to her memory. I knew we couldn't live in grief forever. Tiffany had taught me that no matter how cruel life was, we had to find a way to stand up. So I began rebuilding a life for Max and me, one small step at a time. I decided to redo Isla's room, not to erase her memory, but to make it a place where we could carry her and Tiffany forward in a positive way. Max and I painted the walls together, choosing a pale blue that Isla once said was the color of the sky in her fairy tales. We set up a small bookshelf, filling it with the adventure stories Isla loved and a photo of Tiffany, her gray eyes shining with a radiant smile. Max hung the drawing he and Isla made, a princess in a field of flowers, on the wall. "Mom would like this place," he said, calling Tiffany Mom for the first time without hesitation. I hugged him, feeling a flicker of warmth in my heart. I also started the process of formally adopting Max. It was a challenging journey filled with lengthy interviews from Child Protective Services and stacks of paperwork. At times, I feared they'd deny me, thinking a single father who just lost his daughter wasn't fit to care for a boy with a complex past like Max. But every time I looked into Max's gray eyes, I remembered my promise to Tiffany, and I knew I couldn't give up. Max at first didn't believe I truly wanted to adopt him. "Why are you doing this?" he asked one evening as we sat eating sandwiches in the kitchen. "I'm not really your son." I looked him in the eyes, my voice firm. "Max, you're Tiffany's son, and that makes you mine. I want you here because I love you." Max fell silent, but I saw his eyes redden. He nodded, and from then on I knew he was starting to trust me. Max began school in Bozeman, and I was surprised at how quickly he adapted. He made friends, though he remained shy, and I saw him smile more often. Once he brought home a drawing from art class, a family with a man, a boy, and 2 bright stars in the sky. "That's Mom and Isla," he said, pointing to the stars. I hugged him, tears falling silently. "That's right, son," I said, calling him son for the first time without hesitation. From then on, Max started calling me Dad instead of Clayton, and I felt that was a small victory, a step forward in our journey. A year after Isla's passing, I felt it was time for Max and me to return to Nashville to honor Tiffany and Isla, to tell them we were okay, even though the pain lingered. I reached out to Isla's kindergarten colleagues, her friends, Nurse Ellen, and a few others who knew our family. They agreed to join a small memorial at the cemetery, and I found some comfort in knowing Tiffany and Isla were still remembered. The trip to Nashville was an emotional journey. Max sat in the passenger seat, clutching Isla's cloth doll, his gray eyes fixed on the window. "You okay?" I asked softly. Max nodded, but I saw his hands tighten around the doll. "I want to tell Mom and Isla I tried," he said, his voice small but resolute. I placed a hand on his shoulder, saying nothing, but in my heart I knew Tiffany would be proud of this boy. The memorial took place under the oak trees in the Nashville cemetery. I placed a bouquet of white daisies on Tiffany's grave, while Max set a new drawing, a princess and a boy standing side by side, on Isla's. Ellen shared stories about Tiffany, how she always brought joy to the kids at kindergarten. "Tiffany would be so proud of you both," she said, looking at Max and me. Max held my hand, and I felt the quiet strength in his fingers. He didn't cry, but I saw his shoulders tremble slightly, and I knew he was learning to say goodbye. Today I stand here in the Nashville cemetery, where the gentle autumn sunlight filters through the oak trees, casting long beams across the ground. Max stands beside me, now 13, with deep gray eyes that, every time I look into them, show me Tiffany, Isla, and the days of joy and sorrow that have passed. Before us are two graves, one large, one small, where Tiffany and Isla rest side by side. Their names are etched deeply into the stones. Tiffany Callahan, 1993 to 2019. Isla Callahan, 2017 to 2022. My wife, my daughter. Two lives that left me but also left one final piece. That piece is Max. The cool autumn breeze wraps around us, carrying the scent of dry leaves and a hint of daisies from the bouquet I placed on Tiffany's grave. Max clutches Isla's old cloth doll, the toy he's kept close since those hospital days. He bends down, placing the doll on Isla's headstone, his movements slow and gentle, as if afraid to disturb his sister. "This is yours, Isla," he whispers, his voice so soft I have to lean in to hear. I stand silently, my heart tightening. Max has rarely spoken much at Isla's grave, but today I see a difference in him. A quiet peace, as if he's found a way to accept. "Dad," Max says suddenly, his voice soft but clear. I turn, stunned. It's the first time he's called me Dad. My heart feels like it stops, and I kneel beside him, looking into his shimmering gray eyes. Tears well up, but I smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your mom would be so proud today," I say, unsure if I'm speaking to Max, to Tiffany, or to myself. Max nods, the corner of his mouth curling into a small smile, and I see in his eyes not just pain, but a spark of hope. I take Max's hand, leading him away from the cemetery. The path ahead is covered in golden leaves, the early autumn sunlight stretching out, as if guiding us toward a future I can't yet fully see. I don't know what the days ahead will hold, or if the scars in our hearts will ever truly heal. But feeling Max's small hand in mine, I know we've found each other amidst irreparable loss. We've lost so much, Tiffany, Isla, the dream of a complete family, but we've found each other, and sometimes that's enough.